My brother mocked me for having no money, not knowing I paid his bills. "You'll never be successful," he said. Few days later, he regretted. The knife's edge caught the chandelier light as I carefully sliced into my roast beef, pretending not to notice Ryan's smirk from across the dining table. My parents' weekly Sunday dinner had become my personal purgatory, a ritual of endurance rather than enjoyment. "So, Layla," Ryan began, swirling his expensive Cabernet, "still driving that Toyota from college? What is it now, 15 years old?" I took a deliberate bite, chewing slowly to delay my response. 14. Still runs perfectly. My mother caught my eye, her gaze apologetic. She knew what was coming. So did I. "You know," Ryan continued, leaning back in his chair, Rolex gleaming under the light, "Henderson Motors is having a sale this weekend. Nothing fancy, just some mid-range models that might be in your budget bracket." "My car works fine," I replied, voice level as I reached for my water glass. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Not today. You'll never be successful with that attitude, Layla." There it was, his favorite refrain, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who believed his bank account made him superior. Success requires investment. Risk. Things you've never understood. Our father cleared his throat. "How's that project coming along at work, Ryan?" But my brother wasn't finished. "I closed the Westridge account yesterday," he announced, ignoring Dad's attempt to change the subject. Commission alone was over 30 grand. He turned to me with manufactured sympathy. "That's probably more than you make in 3 months with your little. What are you calling it these days?" "Consulting." "Something like that," I murmured, pushing my potatoes around my plate. What Ryan didn't know, what I had carefully kept hidden from him for 3 years, was that his entire life was built on quicksand. His mortgage, his luxury car, even the private school tuition for his son Jake, all of it paid through a shell company I controlled. A company that, through a series of discrete transactions, had been covering his mounting debts since his gambling problems spiraled out of control. Not that he recognized it as gambling. Strategic investments, he called them. The same way his third mortgage was a temporary cash flow adjustment. "Well, if you ever want career advice," Ryan offered with that signature condescension, "I know some people who might have entry-level positions. Nothing glamorous, but everyone has to start somewhere." Our mother's fork clinked sharply against her plate. "Ryan, please. Not at dinner." "What?" He raised his hands in mock innocence. "I'm trying to help. Someone has to worry about Layla's future." I met his gaze evenly. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm doing fine." "Fine," he chuckled, turning to our parents. "Did you hear that? She's fine." That's code for barely surviving, but too proud to admit it. He shook his head. "Pride won't pay your rent when you're 50, sis." The irony might have been amusing if it wasn't so painful. While Ryan flaunted his executive title and corner office, I had built Titan Innovations from a cramped apartment into a company now valued at $87 million. While he charged designer suits to credit cards he couldn't pay off, I lived simply, investing nearly everything back into my business or, in a twist he would never comprehend, into saving him from himself. Speaking of careers, our father interjected firmly, "How's Jake doing in his coding class?" Ryan brightened at the mention of his son. "Crushing it. Kid's a natural. His teacher thinks he could get into MIT with the right guidance." He shot me another look. "I've already started his college fund. Planning ahead. That's how you create generational wealth." The text message that vibrated my phone under the table would have shattered his smug expression. It was from my CFO, Meridian Acquisition finalized. We now control 51% of their assets. Board meeting Monday to discuss restructuring. Meridian, Ryan's employer. The company that had no idea it had just been acquired by the little sister Ryan had been mocking for the past decade. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Layla," my mother observed, her eyes searching mine for signs of hurt. I smiled. Genuine now. Just enjoying the food. Probably calculating if she can afford dessert. Ryan stage whispered to Dad, who didn't laugh. "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about making some changes." Ryan's eyebrow arched. "Finally taking my advice about a real job?" "Not exactly." I took a sip of water. I might buy a new car. About time, Ryan snorted. That old thing is one pothole away from the junkyard. I didn't mention that I was considering a limited production Aston Martin, or that I just approved the design for a lake house 3 lots down from the vacation property Ryan had been bragging about trying to buy. As dinner wound down and Ryan launched into a monologue about his upcoming business trip to Singapore, a trip that would be canceled once the acquisition news broke, I silently rehearsed what I would say at Monday's board meeting. The meeting where I would decide the fate of Meridian's executive team, including its regional sales director, Ryan Mitchell. Earth to Layla, Ryan snapped his fingers in front of me. Seriously, where do you go when you space out like that? Fantasy land where you're not broke. Our mother set down her dessert fork with unusual force. Ryan, that's enough. It's fine, Mom, I said, then turned to my brother. I was just thinking about the future. You should be, Ryan replied, checking his watch, the one I knew he'd pawned and repurchased twice. Yours is going to be here before you know it, and what do you have to show for yourself? No husband, no kids, no career to speak of. Just projects. If he only knew that one of my projects had just made me his boss. Walking to my car after dinner, Ryan caught up with me in the driveway. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he pressed a business card into my hand. My friend Mark needs an office assistant, he said. Nothing fancy, but it's stable. Dental insurance. $20 an hour. His tone suggested I should be grateful. I mentioned you. He's willing to overlook your spotty employment history. I stared at the card, emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to laugh in his face, to pull out my phone and show him Titan stock value, to tell him I could buy and sell Mark's entire company with what I spent on business lunches last month. Instead, I tucked the card into my pocket. Thanks. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, he advised. Opportunities like this don't come around often for people in your situation. As I watched him stride to his BMW, the one with 3 missed payments I'd covered last month, I made a decision. The careful separation I'd maintained between my personal and professional lives had served its purpose, but perhaps it was time for walls to come down. Not because I craved recognition, but because Ryan needed a reality check more than he needed my financial safety net. See you next Sunday, I called after him, smiling to myself. What I didn't say, and Monday will change everything. Little did my brother know, his unsuccessful sister was about to become the most important person in his professional life. And the sweet taste of karma was already on my tongue. Monday morning arrived with the crisp inevitability of autumn. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, 40 stories above the city, watching the sunrise paint golden edges on glass and steel. The boardroom behind me was empty, waiting for the meeting that would reshape 2 companies and one particularly arrogant brother's life. 6 years ago, this office was a dream I couldn't afford. Titan Innovations began in my studio apartment, with a second-hand desk wedged between my bed and refrigerator. My co-founder Eliza and I worked 20-hour days, surviving on instant noodles and determination. While Ryan climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian, posting vacation photos from Bali and buying his first Rolex, I missed 3 rent payments and sold my car to make payroll. Ms. Mitchell? My assistant Tara appeared at the door, tablet in hand. The board members are arriving. I nodded, smoothing my charcoal suit, the first designer piece I'd ever purchased after our series of funding closed. And the Meridian documents? All prepared. She handed me a sleek leather portfolio. Legal confirmed everything's ready for signatures. As I followed Tara to the boardroom, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Is today the day? I replied with a simple, yes. Only my parents knew about Titan. They'd been my first investors, emptying their modest retirement account to bet on their daughter's vision, something Ryan had called throwing good money after bad. They never told him, honoring my request to build this success on my own terms. The boardroom filled quickly with Titan's executives and major shareholders. At precisely 9 a.m., I called the meeting to order. Good morning, I began, standing at the head of the table. Today marks a pivotal moment for Titan Innovations. The Meridian acquisition is complete. Approving murmurs rippled through the room. This expansion gives us immediate access to Meridian's client base and technology patents, I continued, clicking through projection slides. However, their organizational structure requires significant optimization. My CFO, Marcus, leaned forward. Their leadership team has been burning cash for 3 years. Q4 projections show another 15% loss. I nodded. Which brings us to our first priority, restructuring Meridian's executive team. For the next hour, we analyzed departments, evaluated performance metrics, and made hard decisions about who would stay and who would go. When Ryan's department appeared on screen, I maintained my professional demeanor despite the turmoil inside me. Sales has been underperforming across all regions, Marcus noted, especially under Regional Director Mitchell. A board member frowned. Mitchell? Isn't he the one who lost the Westridge account? After having it for 10 years, another added. Westridge was their oldest client. The irony was almost painful. Just yesterday, Ryan had boasted about closing the Westridge account. He hadn't mentioned that closing meant losing them to a competitor. Director Mitchell's division shows a 40% decline year-over-year, I stated clinically. His personnel file also indicates 3 warnings for ethical violations regarding expense accounts. What I didn't mention, I'd been anonymously covering those creative accounting issues for years, protecting Ryan from consequences he should have faced long ago. Recommendation? Marcus asked. I took a breath. We have 2 options, immediate termination or probationary reassignment. The board's consensus was clear. Ryan's position would be eliminated, along with most of Meridian's executive team. As the meeting concluded, my phone lit up with an unexpected alert from building security. Ryan Mitchell requesting access to executive floor. Claims family emergency. My stomach tightened. He shouldn't even know I worked here, let alone have any reason to visit. Tara, I called as the board members filed out. There's a man downstairs claiming to be my brother. Please have security bring him up to my office, not the reception area. 20 minutes later, I stood behind my desk as my door opened. Ryan's confident stride faltered when he saw me, confusion crossing his face as he took in my office, the awards on the walls, the view, the obvious trappings of significant success. Layla. He looked around as if expecting to find someone else. What are you doing here? I need to speak with Eliza Chen. Eliza, my co-founder and the public face of Titan, while I preferred to operate away from the spotlight. Eliza's in Tokyo this week. I replied calmly. I can help you. You work here? He was still struggling to process what he was seeing. You could say that. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. What's the emergency, Ryan? He remained standing, suspicion replacing confusion. There's a rumor Titan bought Meridian. My boss isn't answering calls, and HR is being weird. His eyes narrowed. What's your position here exactly? Instead of answering, I picked up a framed photo from my desk and handed it to him. It showed Eliza and me on the day we founded Titan, standing in that tiny apartment, holding our incorporation papers. Co-founder and CEO, I said simply. The photo trembled in his hands. This is some kind of joke. Forbes didn't think so when they put me on their 40 under 40 list last year. I pointed to the magazine cover on my wall, the one he'd apparently never bothered to look at during family visits to our parents' home, where it hung prominently in the living room. But you're always broke, he whispered, more to himself than to me. Your clothes, your car, your apartment. I live within modest means by choice, I replied. I prefer investing in my company rather than appearances. His face cycled through emotions, disbelief, realization, and finally, the dawning horror of understanding. The acquisition he managed. That's why you're here. You. Titan bought Meridian. His eyes widened further. You're my boss now. Actually, I said, opening the leather portfolio Tara had handed me earlier. As of this morning, Meridian's regional sales director position has been eliminated. The color drained from his face. You're firing me? I allowed myself a small smile. Not exactly. I slid a document across the desk, an internal job posting for a mid-level sales position within Titan's newly acquired divisions. The salary was exactly half what Ryan currently made. "I'm offering you a chance to prove yourself," I said, "without the safety net of a title you didn't earn or connections you didn't deserve. Starting from where you should have been all along." His hand trembled as he reached for the paper. "Why would you do this?" "Because sometimes, Ryan," I said, leaning forward, "the people you mock on Sunday might become the people who sign your paychecks on Monday." "You're seriously applying?" Ryan clutched the job posting, knuckles white against the paper. "After everything you just told me?" I leaned back in my chair, letting silence fill the space between us. Outside my office windows, clouds drifted past, 40 stories high. How fitting, I thought, that this conversation would happen in the sky, where everything looks different, clearer, perhaps. "Your alternatives are limited," I finally said. "Meridian's executive team is being dissolved. Your resume shows a pattern of declining performance, and your reputation in the industry isn't exactly stellar." "Because you've been talking to people about me?" His voice rose with indignation. "Because you've been burning bridges for years," I corrected. "The Westridge account you claimed to close yesterday? They left because you missed 3 meetings to attend poker tournaments." His face flushed. "How did you?" "I own the company now, Ryan. I've seen all the internal reports." He collapsed into the chair across from me, the swagger he'd worn all his life suddenly deflated. "This is insane," he muttered. "My little sister. All this time." "The interview is tomorrow at 9 a.m., I said, checking my watch. "You'll meet with our HR director and sales team lead. I won't be present." "You're making the interview?" His incredulity would have been comical if it wasn't so predictable. "After all those family dinners where you could have mentioned you owned a multi-million-dollar company? All those dinners where you never once asked what I actually did for work?" I countered. "Where you assumed my worth based on my car and clothes?" The anger that flashed across his face wasn't surprising, but what followed was. Ryan's shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed something I'd never seen from him before. Vulnerability. "I can't start over," he said quietly. "I have Jake to think about. Private school. The mortgage. Car payments. You should have considered that before taking out 3 loans for your gambling habit." His head snapped up. "How do you? Who do you think has been covering your debts for the last 3 years?" The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back in his chair, eyes wide with dawning comprehension. The anonymous transfers, the mortgage payments that mysteriously processed late, but never affected my credit score. His voice was barely audible. "That was you." I nodded once. "Why?" he whispered. "Because you're my brother. Because Jake deserves stability. And because I was waiting for you to hit rock bottom and finally ask for help." I shrugged. "Unfortunately, your ego proved more resilient than I anticipated." Ryan covered his face with his hands, and for a moment, I thought he might actually break down in my office. Instead, he took a deep breath and looked up, his expression hardened with resolve. "I don't need your charity," he said. "I'll find another job." "In this industry?" After losing Meridian's biggest client. I raised an eyebrow. "Good luck with that." "You're enjoying this," he accused. "Parts of it," I admitted. "Not as much as I expected." The tension between us stretched like an over-tightened wire. Then my intercom buzzed. "Ms. Mitchell, your 11 o'clock is waiting," Tara's voice announced. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., I repeated, standing to signal our meeting was over. Professional attire, updated resume, and preparation for actual interview questions. "This isn't a formality, Ryan. You'll be evaluated like any other candidate." He rose slowly, studying me as if seeing a stranger. "You were never the person I thought you were." "Funny," I replied. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." That evening, my mother called as I was reviewing acquisition documents in my apartment, the same modest 2-bedroom I'd lived in for years, despite having the means to buy the entire building. "Ryan came by," she said without preamble. "He looks shell-shocked." "Did he tell you what happened?" "Most of it." I could hear the mixture of concern and pride in her voice. "Layla, are you sure about this? He's still your brother." "Which is the only reason he's getting an interview instead of a severance package," I replied. He said you've been paying his bills. The question hung unspoken in her words. Someone had to clean up his messes, I sighed. The gambling was getting worse. Jake's tuition was at risk. The line went quiet for a moment before she spoke again. You know, your father, and I always wondered why you kept your success from Ryan specifically. Now I understand. Do you think I'm being cruel? I asked, surprising myself with the question. I think you're giving him what he's needed for a long time, consequences.
She paused.
And maybe a second chance he doesn't deserve but might actually take. After we hung up, I found myself standing at my window, looking out at the city lights. The same view I'd had for years, while building an empire nobody in my life except my parents knew about. The simplicity had been intentional, a way to focus on what mattered rather than status symbols Ryan chased endlessly. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. It's Ryan. This is my new personal phone. Company phone was deactivated. We need to talk before tomorrow. I hesitated before responding. There's nothing to discuss. 9 a.m. His reply came immediately. Please. Not as a job candidate. As your brother. Meet me at Carlton's. 8 p.m. Carlton's, an upscale bar where Ryan often entertained clients on the company card. Where he'd once refused to invite me because, as he put it, the clientele has a certain financial standard. New phone, same old Ryan, I thought. But curiosity won out. I'll give you 30 minutes. Carlton's gleamed with polished wood and soft lighting. I arrived deliberately underdressed in jeans and a simple blouse, the kind of outfit that had once caused Ryan to suggest I make more of an effort at family gatherings. He sat at a corner table, nursing what looked like scotch, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. When he spotted me, he straightened his tie, a nervous habit from childhood. Thank you for coming, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. 29 minutes, I replied, glancing at my watch. Ryan took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about me never asking what you do. He met my eyes directly. So, I'm asking now. Tell me about your company, Layla. The real story, not the corporate version. Of all the things I expected from this meeting, genuine interest wasn't one of them. Why? I asked, studying his face for signs of manipulation. Because, he said quietly, I need to understand how my little sister became the most powerful person in my life without me even noticing. I studied Ryan's face in Carlton's dim lighting, searching for the mockery or manipulation I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Instead, I found something unfamiliar, genuine curiosity tinged with shame. You really want to know? I asked, still skeptical. Yes, he said simply. I do. The waiter approached, and Ryan automatically ordered another scotch. Just water for me, I said when the waiter turned to me. Still the responsible one, Ryan remarked with a weak smile. Someone had to be. When the waiter left, an uncomfortable silence settled between us. For once, Ryan didn't fill it with boasts or cutting remarks. Titan started in my apartment. I began finally. Eliza and I met at a hackathon. We were both working dead-end IT jobs, but we had an idea for predictive analytics software that could revolutionize supply chain management. That's what Titan does. Analytics. That's how we started. I traced a pattern on the polished table. We pitched to 52 investors before anyone took us seriously. One venture capitalist told me to come back when your boyfriend has refined the code. Ryan winced. That's awful. That was Tuesday. By Friday, we'd secured our first round of funding from his competitor. I allowed myself a small smile at the memory. We built the company overnight, literally. 18-hour days, sleeping on office floors, eating whatever was cheapest. While I was giving you career advice, Ryan muttered, looking into his glass. While you were telling everyone I'd never amount to anything, I corrected. Do you remember Jake's 10th birthday party? He frowned. At the bowling alley? Vaguely. You pulled Dad aside and told him he should stop enabling my failure by letting me stay at his cabin to work on my little computer projects. The memory still stung. I wasn't staying there to save on rent. I was coding our second-generation algorithm, the one that eventually became Titan's core product and tripled our valuation overnight. The waiter returned with our drinks. Ryan took a large swallow of his scotch, then set it down deliberately. "I've been a complete ass," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "You have." He looked up, something raw and unfamiliar in his expression. "Why did you keep paying my debts? You could have let me crash and burn." "Because of Jake," I answered honestly. "And because no matter how insufferable you've been, you're still my brother." "The money, how much was it?" "Over the past 3 years? $427,000. He choked on his drink. "What?" "The gambling debts alone were close to $200,000. Then there were the 3 mortgage payments you missed, Jake's tuition when your account bounced, the tax lien that mysteriously disappeared." Ryan's face had gone pale. "I thought those were bank errors. Or Dad helping out. Or just luck." "It wasn't luck. It was your little sister writing checks you never knew about." He set his glass down with a shaking hand. "I can't repay that kind of money. Not now, not without my position at Meridian." "I'm not asking you to repay it. Then what do you want?" The question hung between us, heavy with decades of misunderstanding. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from our mother. "Did you meet with Ryan? You told Mom about tonight?" I asked, surprised. "I tell Mom everything now," he said, an unfamiliar humility in his voice. "Part of my recovery program." I looked up sharply. "Recovery program?" "Gambling Anonymous," he admitted. 3 weeks in. "Not that it matters now that you know everything." "You're in recovery and you didn't tell me?" For some reason, this hurt more than all his mockery. Why would I? Ryan's laugh was bitter. "You are the perpetual screw-up in my narrative. Admitting I had a problem would have shattered the illusion of superiority I worked so hard to maintain." For the first time, I glimpsed the insecurity beneath my brother's arrogance, the fragile ego that needed constant reinforcement, the desperate need to appear successful at all costs. "The interview tomorrow," Ryan said, changing the subject. "Is it real, or just theater before you fire me?" "It's real," I replied, "but not for the position you're expecting." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "We created a new role, recovery specialist." "I don't understand." "Titan has a problem," I explained. "We acquire companies with valuable technology but toxic cultures. Meridian is a perfect example. Brilliant engineers led by executives who fostered a cutthroat environment where ethical corners were routinely cut." Ryan flinched at the accurate description of his former workplace. "We need someone who understands that culture from the inside." I continued. "Someone who can identify the problems because they've been part of them. Someone who knows what rock bottom looks like and how to climb back up." Understanding dawned slowly across his face. "You want me to help reform Meridian's culture? If you can convince our interview panel you're the right person for it." I held his gaze steadily. "This isn't nepotism, Ryan. You'll have to earn this position based on genuine insight and capability, not your connection to me." "Why would you even consider me for this?" he asked. "After everything?" "Because sometimes the people who've made the most mistakes have the clearest vision of how to fix a broken system." I glanced at my watch. "Your 30 minutes are up." As I rose to leave, Ryan caught my wrist gently. "Wait. There's one more thing I need to know." I paused, raising an eyebrow. "All these years," he said, "when I was mocking you, belittling your work, assuming you were a failure, how did you not hate me?" The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. "Who says I didn't?" I replied softly. "Then why help me at all?" I thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the cutting remarks, all the times I'd wanted to throw my success in his face, but chose silence instead. Because hate and love aren't mutually exclusive, Ryan, especially with family. As I walked out of Carlton's, I felt a strange lightness. Tomorrow would bring the formal interview, a test not just of Ryan's qualifications, but of his capacity for genuine change. Whether he passed or failed would depend not on my influence, but on something far more unpredictable, his ability to see himself clearly for perhaps the first time in his life. And regardless of the outcome, something fundamental had shifted between us. The lies, both his carefully constructed facade of success and my deliberate concealment of it, had finally crumbled, leaving only the raw truth for us both to confront. The interview room felt unnaturally bright at 8:55 the next morning. I watched through one-way glass as Ryan entered. 5 minutes early, I noted with surprise. His suit was pressed, his posture straight, but the swagger that had defined him for decades was noticeably absent. Marcus, my CFO, stood beside me. "Are you sure about this? Personal connections can complicate business decisions." "That's why I'm observing, not participating," I replied. "The panel doesn't know he's my brother. Their evaluation will be unbiased, and if they reject him, then he gets the same severance package as the other Meridian executives." I kept my voice neutral, though the thought sent an unexpected pang through me. The interview panel consisted of our HR director, head of organizational development, and Eliza, my co-founder, and the only person on the panel who knew my connection to the candidate. "Mr. Mitchell," Eliza began, "your resume shows considerable experience in sales leadership, but the recovery specialist role is quite different. What makes you qualified to help transform a toxic corporate culture?" Ryan took a deep breath. I expected the practiced charm he'd always deployed in professional settings, the smooth confidence that had carried him through previous career advancements despite mediocre performance. Instead, he did something I'd never seen before. He told the truth. "Honestly, I'm qualified because I helped create that toxic culture." His voice was steady, his gaze direct. "For 10 years, I perpetuated a system where results justified any means, where ethical corners were routinely cut, and where vulnerability was seen as weakness." The panel exchanged surprised glances. "That's unusually candid," our HR director remarked. "Most candidates try to present their past experience in the best possible light." "I've recently learned that the stories we tell ourselves can become dangerous illusions," Ryan replied. "I'm done with illusions." Beside me, Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Not the same guy you described over dinner last week." I nodded silently, equally surprised by this unrecognizable version of my brother. For the next 40 minutes, Ryan answered questions with a clarity and honesty I'd never witnessed from him. When asked about specific strategies to promote ethical decision-making, he described how his own rationalizations had led to increasingly problematic choices. When questioned about identifying at-risk employees, he outlined the warning signs he displayed himself. "Final question," Eliza said. "Why do you want this particular position?" Ryan paused, seeming to carefully consider his words. "Recently, someone showed me extraordinary grace after years of me showing none in return," he said finally. "That experience made me realize how powerful second chances can be when they're accompanied by accountability. I want to be part of creating that kind of environment here, where people can acknowledge failures, make amends, and rebuild with integrity." As the interview concluded and Ryan was escorted to the waiting area, the panel immediately began their discussion. I watched their animated conversation through the glass, unable to hear their words, but reading their body language. "Impressive," Marcus commented. "If I didn't know better, I'd think that was a different person than the Ryan Mitchell in our Meridian reports." "People can surprise you," I replied, my throat unexpectedly tight. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "Unanimous yes. He was exceptional. Coming to tell you in person." Moments later, she entered our observation room, closing the door behind her. "So?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We're offering him the position," she confirmed. "Honestly, Layla, if I didn't know he was your brother, I'd still say he was perfect for this role." His insights into dysfunctional leadership were remarkably self-aware. "Thank you for being objective," I said. "Do you want to deliver the news?" Eliza asked. I shook my head. "This needs to be a clean business decision, not a family matter. Have HR handle it like any other hire." Marcus and Eliza exchanged glances. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," Eliza replied with a small smile. "It's just, you've spent years keeping your professional success separate from your personal life with him. Maybe it's time to integrate those worlds." After they left, I remained in the observation room, watching as our HR director entered the waiting area, and Ryan's face transformed with disbelief, then relief. Something twisted in my chest, pride, perhaps, or vindication, or some complex emotion without a name. Hours later, I stood on the rooftop garden of our office building, my private retreat when decisions weighed heavily. The city sprawled below, people moving like miniatures through their lives, unaware of the dramas unfolding 40 stories above them. I thought I might find you here. I turned to find Ryan at the garden entrance, his tie loosened, his expression hesitant. Eliza told me you might be up here, he explained. I hope that's okay. Congratulations on the position, I said. The panel was impressed. I was honest for the first time in. He shook his head. Maybe the first time ever in a professional setting. It suited you. He approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. I've been thinking about your question last night, about how you could help me when I treated you so badly. And I think I understand now. He looked out over the city. You were playing a different game all along. While I was chasing the appearance of success, you were building the real thing. While I was putting others down to lift myself up, you were quietly supporting people, even the ones who hurt you. The evening breeze carried the scent of the potted lavender I'd installed when this garden was first created. I used to think success meant having people look up to you, Ryan continued. Now I wonder if it's actually about looking out for other people. That's a start, I acknowledged. He turned to face me directly. I know a single conversation doesn't erase years of behavior. I know I have a lot to prove, but I want to thank you, not just for the job, but for the wake-up call I desperately needed. You earned the position on your own merits, I said. The panel didn't know you were my brother. Surprise flickered across his face. Really? Really? Something shifted in his expression, a lightness I hadn't seen since we were children, before competition and comparison poisoned our relationship. Then this is my first legitimate achievement in years, he said quietly, without connections or shortcuts or the Mitchell name opening doors. How does it feel? I asked, a genuine smile. Not the practiced charm or smug superiority I was accustomed to, spread across his face. Terrifying, he admitted. And right. We stood in silence as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden. For the first time in our adult lives, the space between us felt not like a battlefield but like common ground, tentative and unfamiliar, but real. 3 months passed with the swift intensity that always accompanied major corporate transitions. Titan's absorption of Meridian created daily challenges, integrating teams, reconciling different company cultures, managing the inevitable resistance to change. Through it all, I watched Ryan from a careful distance. His first week had been rough. Word traveled quickly that the notorious Ryan Mitchell from Meridian's old guard was now leading cultural recovery efforts. The irony wasn't lost on his former colleagues, many of whom regarded him with open skepticism or outright hostility. How's it going? I asked during one of our new weekly coffee meetings, a brief, neutral ground where we could speak as siblings rather than CEO and employee. Brutal, he admitted, stirring his black coffee. Jenkins from accounting won't even look at me. Chun from engineering called me a corporate parasite turned wellness guru. Are you surprised?
No, he sighed.
I earned every bit of it. That's actually helping, owning my part instead of deflecting. I nodded, still adjusting to this new, self-aware version of my brother. The transition team says you've been effective with the more resistant departments. It turns out, Ryan said with a hint of his old wry smile, that being the biggest jerk in the room gives you insight into how to reach other jerks. By the second month, something unexpected began happening. Departments that had been Meridian's most toxic were showing early signs of transformation. Employee feedback surveys indicated growing trust. Ryan's team had implemented an anonymous ethics reporting system that was actually being used constructively rather than for personal vendettas. At our parent Sunday dinner, now a less tense affair, our father remarked on the change in Ryan. "You seem different, son," he said as we cleared the table together. "More present." Ryan glanced at me before answering. "I'm learning to measure success differently." Our mother squeezed my hand under the table, her silent acknowledgement of my part in this transformation. But the true test came in the third month, when Jake's private school announced an unexpected mid-year tuition increase. "I can't swing it," Ryan admitted during our coffee meeting, staring into his cup. Not on my new salary. I'm still paying down debts, and the alimony to Karen takes a chunk. I waited, curious whether this financial pressure would trigger a backslide into old patterns, the entitlement, the expectation that someone would bail him out. Instead, he looked up with clear eyes. I'm going to talk to Jake about transferring to Madison Prep. It's public, but has a good STEM program. He might actually prefer it, less pressure, more diverse student body. You're not going to ask me for money? I couldn't help asking. Would you give it to me if I did? He countered.
No.
He nodded.
Good.
Because I need to fix this myself. He hesitated before adding, though I wouldn't refuse advice on talking to a 13-year-old about downsizing his life. For the first time in our adult relationship, Ryan was asking for something I was genuinely happy to give, perspective rather than financial rescue. The quarterly all-hands meeting arrived on a crisp autumn morning. As CEO, I stood before the combined Titan and Meridian teams, 400 employees gathered in our largest conference space, with hundreds more watching via video link from satellite offices. 6 months ago, many of you were competitors, I began. Today, we're colleagues working toward a shared vision. The integration hasn't been perfect. Change never is. But the progress has exceeded our most optimistic projections. From my position at the podium, I could see Ryan sitting with his team, not at the front where visibility would signal importance, but in the middle rows, deliberately integrated with the staff he served. Today, I want to highlight one team that exemplifies the transformation we're creating. The Cultural Recovery Unit, led by Ryan Mitchell, has established new benchmarks for ethical leadership and transparent communication. Ryan's expression of surprise was genuine. This recognition hadn't been on the agenda I'd shared with him. Mr. Mitchell's team has achieved a 40% increase in issue reporting while simultaneously reducing formal HR complaints by 35%. They've created pathways for employees to address concerns before they become crises. Most importantly, they've demonstrated that acknowledging past failures is the first step toward meaningful change. As applause filled the room, I watched Ryan accept the recognition with a gracious nod. No grandstanding, no self-aggrandizement, just quiet pride in work well done. Later that afternoon, as evening approached, I found myself again on the rooftop garden. The door opened behind me, and I knew without looking who had joined me. Thank you for the recognition today, Ryan said, coming to stand beside me at the railing. It meant a lot to the team. They earned it. You earned it. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to twinkle on as dusk descended. Jake got accepted to Madison Prep's advanced science track, he said after a while. He's actually excited about it. Says the robotics team is better than at his old school. That's great. I told him everything, Layla. About the gambling. About how I treated you. About the company and who really runs it. Ryan's voice was steady. He deserved the truth. How did he take it? Better than I expected. Kids are resilient. He turned to face me. He asked if you'd come to his science fair next month. Apparently, having a tech CEO aunt is very cool in middle school. The simple request, so ordinary, yet symbolizing something profound, caught me off guard. For years, I'd been the aunt who sent birthday gifts but remained distant, partly from self-protection, partly because Ryan had subtly discouraged deeper connection. I'd like that, I said. Ryan nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. This is for you. I opened it to find a check, a small amount compared to what I'd covered for him over the years, but significant given his reduced circumstances. First repayment, he explained. It'll take years, but every month there will be another. Not because you asked for it, but because I need to make this right. As I looked at my brother, truly looked at him without the filter of old resentments, I realized something unexpected. The sweet taste of karma I'd anticipated for so long was nothing like the bitter victory I'd imagined. Instead, it was the quiet satisfaction of watching someone grow into their better self. Keep it, I said, handing the check back. Start a college fund for Jake instead. Layla. Some debts can't be repaid with money, I interrupted gently. And some don't need to be repaid at all. In the fading light, Surrounded by the city that had witnessed both our failures and successes, we stood not as CEO and employee, not as successful sister and humble brother, but simply as family, imperfect, complicated, and finally, genuinely connected.